Hello and welcome to my second part of my trip report from Billund to Geneva. We've just arrived in Frankfurt.
Are you ready for phase one?
Here we go. Okay, we have very little time. We've just arrived, as I said, with our first plane from Billund into Frankfurt. We're coming in A+ in Frankfurt, and I'm pretty sure that we will have a gate in B. On my ticket it says B2, but there has been a lot of gate changes, so let's just check before we run over there, because we don't have a lot of time. And if it has changed to A and we go to B, we will miss our connection flight. So let's just make sure that we find Geneva. Where's Geneva? Geneva. My God, I'm blind right now. Where's Geneva? Wow, we don't have time for this. Geneva B7. Okay, let's go. So we do actually have a gate change. We had, I think, yeah, as I said on my on my ticket it said B2, but now we have a B7. It's not a huge change, but it's important for us to know that it's still in B, as we have, as I said, very little time. Okay, so we have all these many stairs behind us. We have the long walk behind us. We are now in B, in Terminal 1 of Frankfurt Airport. I apologize for the kind of chaotic start of this trip report, but as I said, it's simply because we don't have a lot of time for a connection flight. It took some time to get in with our last flight at H837, as we had to be brought into the terminal by bus, and our next flight will also be with a terminal where we have to go by bus, which means normally they start boarding very precise, if not a bit early. So the second flight of today from Frankfurt to Geneva will still be on Lufthansa, although operated by Lufthansa CityLine. I'm not quite sure yet which aircraft type we will have, but it's either a Bombardier CRJ or an Embraer E90. Our flight is LH1218. We will be flying from gate B7. Our scheduled boarding time is 12:35 and our scheduled departure time is 13:05. And we will be sitting in seat 15F. So welcome on board LH1218, flying from Frankfurt to Geneva. We are on board an Embraer E90, and this is really the first time in this trip report, or the second part of the trip report at least, where I actually have the time to just sit down calmly and speak to you guys about the flight today. So obviously you could see that we did not have a lot of time to make our connection flight today. This is not very unusual for Frankfurt. Often the connection times are very limited, but today it was quite tight, to be honest. And that's actually a point I would like to talk about, because often with this connection or this flight that I'm doing from Geneva to Billund or from Billund to Geneva, which is probably the route that I'm flying the most, or at least quite often, is that you always have, or almost always have, a remote stand position where you then have to go into the terminal by bus. And when the connection time is limited, going in by bus is a pain because it takes a lot of your connection time and you're not really getting any closer to your gate. So there's one thing that I've always wondered about, and I don't think it will ever happen, but it would just be such a great thing for passengers. In Frankfurt, most buses go into A+ in Frankfurt, which is part of Terminal 1. Sometimes they do stop at B, which is also part of Terminal 1. But Terminal 1 in Frankfurt is quite large, so there's a big difference coming in A+ or in B. And if you have a connection flight in B and you are being offloaded in A+, that means you have to walk quite far, and it will take at least 10-15 minutes. And you don't always have that time, even though they always promise you to have a minimum connection time of half an hour. But when you've already lost like 10 or 15 minutes just going into the terminal by bus, and your next flight is also a connection where you will be going by bus to your plane, then you don't have a lot of time to run on. And the thing I've always been wondering about, why can't Frankfurt Airport let the bus stop at both terminals, or both parts of the terminal, A+ and B? In many occasions the bus passes by B before it goes into A+. So the passengers that anyway have a connection flight in B could just jump out there, and the rest continues to A+. I know if you have a connection flight in A or A+, and you go into A+, that's great, no problem there, but this change between A+ and B makes a huge difference. And if you had the option of going out in either occasions, or either destination, so to say, that would be a really, really big difference and would make the whole connection process in Frankfurt much more relaxed. Well, that was just an idea that I have had for a long time, and I felt like sharing it with you guys. As we are taxiing towards our runway, we don't know exactly which one it will be at the moment, but at some point, of course, it will become more clear. I would speed this process up now, and then we can speak again once we are heading into Geneva, and then we can quickly talk about the flight, how it went, where we went out, on which runway, and so on and so on. And of course, at the end of the video, there will always be a full evaluation of the entire trip with lots of different criteria that we will give points for, and then, of course, a final score. So, talk to you in a little bit. And we're back. We're still on flight LH1218 and we are heading into Geneva now. So let's have a quick recap of this flight so far. In Frankfurt we had to taxi for quite some time as we were heading for runway 18. There we took off from runway 18 shortened, which means that we entered the runway about halfway in, as this was the best access point from the side we were coming from, and as the aircraft doesn't need a very long runway, that was perfectly safe and fine. And it meant, of course, taking runway 18 was ideal for our flight because we could go straight on to a southbound course past Stuttgart and Zurich, and then of course straight into Geneva. And now we are currently heading right over Lac Le Mans, also known as Lake Geneva, into Geneva Airport, coming from the north, and that means we will go in on runway 23. So before we land, let's have a quick talk about today's flight, which was pretty decent. The service was alright. We had a drink, we had a snack, which I actually also ate today because I didn't have time to go to the lounge. The comfort is alright. I actually prefer the seats we have on the Embraer jets of Lufthansa. They're a little bit more comfortable than the standard seatings they have in the other aircrafts. And as you can see, we have about 3 finger space between my knee and the seat in front of me. I'm 182 centimeters high, so that of course would vary from person to person. And there we go, we have landed in Geneva. Welcome to Geneva Airport. We have had a very decent flight so far, and now we will be heading into the terminal. Whether we will be parked at a remote stand position or directly at the terminal, we don't know yet, but we will know in a few minutes. So I will speed this process up, and then we will talk again once we are inside the terminal, and then I'll give my final evaluation of today's trip. And we're off. As you can see, we got a parking position right at the gate, which is awesome because it reduces the time we need to spend here in the airport, and we can exit it relatively fast as we skip the bus. So, as promised, now it is time to evaluate the entire flight and give scores on individual criteria, and they will be as followed on today's trip. I will give scores for the departure airport, for the connection, for boarding, the flight, and the arrival airport. The departure airport was, of course, Frankfurt, and although it's a very big airport and it has its good sides and its bad sides, all in all, it was alright today. There are some things that I think could be improved. For example, the procedures for the buses that take passengers to and from the terminals. I very much dislike that they still have smoking boxes in the airport because the air around those boxes is really disgusting. I don't think this is something that should be an airport in the 21st century. But all in all, I quite like Frankfurt Airport. It's definitely not the worst airport you can find, and given the size of the airport, they manage quite well. For the connection, I would also like to give a score today. This was a bit tricky today. It was quite tight. I obviously didn't have time to go to the lounge, which I could have chosen a different flight with more time and so on and so on. But given the whole procedure, it didn't help with my connection. So it wasn't really ideal. It was just about manageable, but I wouldn't like to do that every time like this. The boarding procedure itself went quite alright today. No big problems there. The flight was very nice. There were no big problems there. Nothing really negative to report, just a very good standard Lufthansa flight. And the arrival airport is, of course, Geneva Airport. And they will definitely get some plus points today that we get a parking position right at the terminal, because it reduces the time I have to spend in the airport and I can get very quickly out of it, which is something I value quite much on my trips. So that leaves us with a fairly decent, I think a pretty decent score. Definitely better score than the first flight we had on this trip. If you haven't seen that trip report yet, then feel free to click the card you can see right now, and you can check out the first flight of my day where I was flying from Billund to Frankfurt. Now, if you have stayed along so far and have watched through this entire trip report, then you are definitely a champ. Thank you so much for that. And I would like to say thank you for now. Thanks for traveling with me. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you soon again. I'm checking out, and bye.